All right, so I hope you've enjoyed what we've been doing in class the last couple of weeks as we've been taking a look at process skills. We've talked about variables, we've talked about making graphs and doing data tables. And part of that falls under what we call the nature of science. So let me just talk to you a little bit about how that works. So the first point of the nature of science is this. It says that science demands and relies on empirical evidence. And that means it's real evidence. And that the data is open to others for review. It's based on evidence and not belief. And finally, science relies on basic observations. You'll notice as you've been with me and we've done science together, I've talked a lot about making observations. I've talked a lot about making sure that we collect good data because we do want other people to be able to look at our data and hopefully draw the same conclusions that we've drawn, although that might not always be the case. But the reason that we have controls, the reason that we record our data is so that somebody can do an investigation someplace else in the world and hopefully get the same results. In other words, they verify what we have found out. And so then we also always realize that evidence is the driving force in science. It's not belief. It's what the evidence shows, and so then we base our conclusions on that evidence. The next point of the nature of science is this, and I'll let you read this one to yourself. Now, depending upon how much science instruction you've had, you've probably heard of the scientific method. And some teachers have probably told you that that's the way scientists do their work. And in some cases that's true because they do use parts and pieces of the scientific method. But when we really drill down in terms of the nature of science, we find out that there really is no single step-by-step method that scientists use. They certainly observe, they classify, they do those kinds of things we've talked about in class. They draw conclusions, they make hypotheses, they do investigations and run experiments. All of those kinds of pieces are done, but there really is no simple checklist step-by-step terms of the scientific method. This is the third point of the nature of science. I'll let you read this. So when we do research in science, we really are not proving anything because what we're really doing is making claims based on the evidence. And it's possible that new evidence will come along and it will disprove what we thought to be true in the past. So when we do science, we're really not trying to prove anything. We're trying to understand something better. So that's what it means by it's tentative, but it's also durable. This is the fourth point of the nature of science, and that is that laws and theories are related, but they are distinct, different kinds of scientific knowledge. For example, laws are generalizations or patterns in nature, such as the law of gravity or Charles' law, and there's other laws like that. But theories are explanations for why those laws hold, such as the kinetic theory of matter, which suggests that tiny particles behaving like billiard balls become more active as the temperature rises. So there's a real distinction between laws and theories, and as you really get into more scientific study, you need to drill down and understand what the differences between laws and theories actually is. Then the next point is that science is a highly creative endeavor, that there's a lot of creativity involved in science, there's a lot of thinking outside the box, there's a lot of, just the wonder of what's going on, and doing science really is a very creative process. We also see that science has a subjective element to it. So two people can look at the same data and draw different conclusions. And that's quite okay. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as the conclusions that they're drawing are both based on evidence. What's been really fun for me at times is to actually be with research scientists, say in Yellowstone Park, where they're talking about some evidence. They're looking at a hot spring pool or something like that, and one scientist will draw one conclusion, another scientist will draw another conclusion. It's fun to listen to them talk about the conclusions that they draw based on the evidence that they've seen, and those are very different conclusions at times. Keep in mind too that science has a historical, a cultural, and a social influence to it. So, for example, the Native Americans have a different historical and cultural perspective on science because of their background. And social influences also occur as well. That's one of the reasons that we get into sort of arguments in science, because there really are these historical, cultural, and social influences. So just keep that in mind. The eighth point of the nature of science is that science and technology impact each other, but they are not the same. Technology oftentimes comes across as a tool. So we can use computers and handhelds and iPods and iPads and things like that. That becomes a tool, but the tool isn't science. Science is really how you look at the world. It's how you go about trying to make sense of what we see in nature. The ninth point is that science and its methods cannot answer all questions. So science will never be able to prove or disprove the existence of God, for example. That's not science's intent. Science is really about trying to make an explanation of what we're seeing in the natural world. And all that information came from this source right here. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit about the nature of science, and we'll hopefully have a chance to talk a little bit more about that in class. Thanks.